He was a titan of technology, a man who could bend the digital world to his will, yet his multi-billion-dollar empire was teetering on the brink of collapse. A single elusive bug in his flagship software was a ghost in the machine, and his army of elite engineers was powerless against it. He fled the chaos of his boardroom for the quiet anonymity of a restaurant, seeking a moment's peace. But in the clatter of the kitchen through a crack in the door, he saw something that made him stop dead. A waitress, her hands flying across a beat-up laptop, her screen filled with lines of code that looked impossibly familiar. She wasn't just typing. She was performing digital surgery. And in that moment, Alexander Sterling realized the answer to his prayers might not be in a sterile lab, but in the calloused hands of the woman about to serve him his coffee. The San Francisco fog, a familiar ethereal blanket, did little to cool Alexander Sterling's temper. It clung to the panoramic windows of his corner office on the 50th floor of the Nexus Dynamics Tower, blurring the glittering lights of the city into a watercolor wash. To the world, this view was a symbol of his triumph. Tonight, it felt like a gilded cage. On the massive holographic display dominating one wall, lines of red text scrolled endlessly, a digital waterfall of failure. Fatal error, memory allocation failure. The message was the epitaph for his company's most ambitious project, Odyssey, an AI-driven logistics platform poised to revolutionize global supply chains. It was supposed to be his legacy, the project that would cement Nexus Dynamics, not just as a tech giant, but as an essential pillar of modern commerce. Instead, it was a multi-hundred-million-dollar disaster. For 3 weeks, the bug had haunted them. It was a phantom, a memory leak so insidious and unpredictable that it defied every diagnostic tool they threw at it. The platform would run smoothly for hours sometimes, even days before crashing catastrophically, bringing simulated global shipping networks to a screeching halt. His lead engineers, hand-picked prodigies from MIT and Stanford, with 6-figure salaries, and egos to match, were stumped. They spoke in circles about recursive loops and heap fragmentation, their confidence eroding with each failed patch. Their latest all-night session had ended just an hour ago, with the same grim result. The pressure was immense. Their biggest client retail behemoth, Viridian Global, had given them a final ultimatum: fix the bug in 72 hours, or they would pull their 9-figure contract and sue for damages. The news would crater Nexus's stock and send their competitors like the ever-circling sharks at Innovate Corp into a feeding frenzy. "Get out," Alexander had growled at his exhausted team, his voice dangerously low. He couldn't stand the sight of their defeated faces any longer. Now alone in the silence, he felt the crushing weight of it all. He was Alexander Sterling, the wunderkind, who'd built an empire from a garage. He thrived on impossible problems. But this was different. He felt a helplessness he hadn't experienced since he was a teenager, trying to fix his family's perpetually broken-down Ford. He needed to escape. He grabbed his coat, a sleek black cashmere affair that felt absurdly out of place with his frayed nerves, and bypassed his private elevator. He took the public one, needing the brief anonymous contact with other people, even if he couldn't look them in the eye. Down on the street, the damp air was a shock. He dismissed his waiting driver, Walter, with a wave. He needed to walk. He wandered through the financial district, a ghost in his own city, the imposing glass and steel structures he helped finance, now feeling like monoliths, mocking his failure. He found himself blocks later, standing outside an unassuming restaurant called the Gilded Spoon. It was an old-world place, a relic from a different San Francisco, with warm light spilling from its windows and the promise of quiet solitude. It was the antithesis of his life. He pushed the heavy oak door open, The restaurant was hushed, the clinking of silverware, and murmured conversations a soothing balm. A host led him to a secluded booth in the back. He ordered a steak he knew he wouldn't eat, and a glass of Macallan 25 he knew he would. As he nursed the scotch, the warmth spreading through his chest, but not his mind, he watched the staff. They moved with a practiced, efficient grace, a ballet of service that was in its own way a perfectly functioning system. His gaze fell on one waitress in particular. She was young, perhaps in her mid-20s, with intelligent, focused eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple, severe ponytail, and there was a subtle tension in her posture, a coiled energy that suggested her mind was elsewhere. Her name tag read Amelia. She moved with a quiet competence, refilling water glasses, clearing plates, and answering questions with a polite but distant smile. There was an aura of fierce intelligence about her, a stark contrast to her humble surroundings. He was on his second scotch when he saw her slip through the swinging doors into the kitchen. He glanced at his watch. 10 minutes passed. 15. The kitchen doors were a whirlwind of activity chefs, shouting servers, rushing in and out. But she didn't reappear. Curiosity, a welcome distraction from his own anxieties, piqued. He needed to use the restroom, which was located down a short hallway past the kitchen entrance. As he walked past, the kitchen door swung open for a moment, and he glanced inside. Amidst the chaos of stainless steel steam and shouting cooks, he saw her. Tucked away in a small, cramped alcove next to a stack of flour sacks was Amelia. She wasn't polishing silverware or taking a smoke break. She was hunched over a battered, decade-old laptop, its screen glowing in the dim light. Her fingers were a blur across the keyboard, moving with a speed and precision that he, a man who'd coded his first program at age 12, recognized instantly. It wasn't the typing of someone writing an email or a college paper. It was the fluid staccato rhythm of a programmer, a creator of worlds. He froze his hand on the restroom door. He squinted, trying to see her screen. It was a dark mode IDE, integrated development environment, filled with lines of what looked like C++. And then he saw it, a specific function call, a multi-threading protocol she was implementing. It was elegant, it was complex, and it was eerily similar to a section of the Odyssey codebase that his own team had been wrestling with for weeks. His breath caught in his throat. The world seemed to slow down. The clatter of the kitchen faded into a dull roar. A waitress, in a kitchen alcove, on a relic of a laptop, typing code that mirrored the very heart of his company's billion-dollar crisis. It was impossible, it was absurd, and it was happening right in front of him. He forgot about the restroom, forgot about his steak, forgot about everything, except the woman in the kitchen who was weaving digital spells amidst the smell of garlic and grease. For a full minute, Alexander Sterling stood motionless in the hallway, a statue of disbelief. His mind, usually a superhighway of calculations and strategic thought, was gridlocked. Every logical instinct told him to dismiss it. Coincidence. A trick of the light. She was probably working on some personal project, a coding boot camp assignment, but the flicker of code he'd seen, it wasn't amateurish. The structure, the syntax, it had a professional signature, a sparse elegance that came from deep understanding, not rote memorization. He took a deep breath, the air thick with the aromas of roasted chicken and cleaning supplies. This was insane. But desperation is the mother of insanity. What did he have to lose his pride? He'd lost that 3 weeks ago, in a conference room full of blank-faced engineers. He pushed the swinging door open and stepped into the chaotic symphony of the kitchen. A blast of heat and noise hit him. "Hey, staff, only a burly chef with a sweat-stained bandana yelled over the sizzle of a grill. Alexander ignored him. His eyes were locked on Amelia. She hadn't noticed him yet, her focus absolute. Her brow was furrowed in concentration, her lower lip caught between her teeth. He walked towards her small corner, stepping over a stray mop bucket. "Excuse me," he said, his voice calmer than he felt. Amelia's head snapped up. Her eyes widened first in surprise, then in professional panic. She instantly slammed her laptop shut. "So you can't be back here. Is there a problem with your meal?" Her waitress persona was back in place, a shield of polite efficiency. "The problem isn't with my meal," Alexander said, his gaze dropping to the closed laptop. "It's with a recursive memory leak in a multi-threaded AI logistics platform." The effect of his words was immediate and profound. The professional mask didn't just crack, it shattered. Amelia's jaw went slack. The color drained from her face. Her eyes, which he'd previously noted as intelligent, now looked sharp, analytical, and deeply wary. She didn't ask what he was talking about. She didn't feign ignorance. She knew. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice a tense whisper. "My name is Alexander Sterling." He watched for a flicker of recognition, and he got one. A subtle widening of her eyes, a slight intake of breath. She knew the name. Everyone in the tech world did. She looked from his expensive suit to his face, the pieces clicking into place. "Nexus Dynamics," she breathed. "Odyssey." It wasn't a question. It was a statement, a diagnosis. "You've heard of it," Alexander stated, the last vestiges of his skepticism evaporating. "I follow the public dev logs." The pre-release buzz, she admitted, her gaze guarded. She clutched the edge of her laptop as if it were a life raft. "You're in trouble. The launch is supposed to be next quarter. The launch will be cancelled, and the company will be gutted if we don't fix a bug that my entire engineering division can't find," he said, laying his cards on the table. There was no point in pretense. "What were you working on just now?" She hesitated, her eyes darting towards the head chef, who was now watching them with a mixture of confusion and annoyance. "A personal project? Don't lie to me, Amelia," he said, his voice soft but laced with an intensity that made her flinch. "I saw your screen. I saw the threading protocol. It was a predictive resource allocation manager. Am I wrong?" She swallowed hard, her knuckles white on her laptop. "No," she admitted quietly. "You're not wrong. I want you to look at our code," Alexander said, the words feeling utterly reckless as they left his mouth. "The Odyssey code." She stared at him, as if he'd just started speaking in tongues. "What, sir, I'm a waitress, and 5 minutes ago you were a programmer. Which one is the real you?" he countered. "I will pay you for your time, a consulting fee, a generous one. Sign whatever NDA my lawyers can dream up. Just look at it." Amelia's mind was clearly racing. Fear, disbelief, and a flicker of something else, a longing, a hunger warred in her expression. "Why would you ask me? You have the best engineers in the world." "The best engineers in the world have been staring at it for almost a month and are about to sink my company," Alexander said bluntly. "They're trapped in a box of their own making, constrained by their own groupthink. You're not in that box. You have nothing to lose, and frankly, neither do I at this point." He saw the conflict in her. This was the opportunity of a lifetime handed to her by a billionaire in the middle of a greasy kitchen. But it was also terrifying. The risk of failure, of humiliation, was enormous. I can't," she stammered, shaking her head. "I don't have a degree. I dropped out of Caltech after 2 years. My mother got sick. I've been working here ever since. I just code for myself, to keep sharp." The confession hung in the air, thick with disappointment and lost potential. Caltech. She wasn't just self-taught. She had been on the path to becoming one of the elites he so readily hired. Life had just gotten in the way. This information didn't deter Alexander. It galvanized him. This wasn't a random fluke. This was untapped genius, derailed by circumstance. "I don't care about your degree." "Amelia," he said, his voice firm, "a degree is a piece of paper that says you can learn. What I saw on that screen says you can do. I care about results. The Odyssey platform is failing because of a flaw in its predictive modeling. It allocates resources for projected shipments, but somewhere in the recursive logic, it creates phantom allocations. It never releases. It's bleeding memory, but we can't find the wound. Does that sound like a problem you'd find interesting?" He watched her as he spoke, detailing the core of the problem. Her expression shifted again. The fear receded, replaced by the focused, analytical look he'd seen when she was at her keyboard. She was no longer a waitress talking to a customer. She was an engineer considering a challenge. "Phantom allocations?" she murmured almost to herself. "It's not just in the recursion. It could be in the way the threads are instantiated. If the parent process dies before the child threads are properly joined, their memory could be orphaned." Her insight was immediate, a plausible theory that his team had mentioned but hadn't fully explored, convinced the error was deeper in the AI model itself. Alexander pulled a sleek black business card from his wallet. "Nexus Dynamics Tower. Be there tomorrow at 9 a.m. Ask for me. I'll clear it with security. Name your price, Amelia. Whatever it is, I'll pay it." He placed the card on top of her closed laptop. Her hand trembled slightly as she looked at it. The simple black card with his name, embossed in silver, was a ticket to another world. "Sir, your table." She started the habit of her job kicking in. "Forget the table," Alexander said, turning to leave. He paused at the door and looked back at her. Her eyes were wide, fixed on the card. 9 a.m. "Amelia, don't make me regret this." He walked out of the kitchen, leaving the noise and the chaos behind. He felt a jolt of adrenaline he hadn't felt in years. It was the most illogical, unprofessional, and desperate move of his career. It was either the decision that would save his company or the final spectacular act of a falling titan. As he stepped back into the quiet restaurant, he realized he had no idea which. The next morning, the lobby of the Nexus Dynamics Tower was everything the Gilded Spoon was not. It was a cathedral of brushed steel glass and stark white marble, vast and intimidating. A 2-story waterfall cascaded silently behind a reception desk that looked like a shard of a meteorite. Young, ambitious people in sharp business attire moved with a silent, urgent purpose, their faces illuminated by the glow of their phones. It was designed to awe, to project power and innovation. To Amelia Rose, clutching her worn backpack strap, it was designed to make her feel small. She had spent the entire night oscillating between euphoric excitement and paralyzing terror. She had researched the Odyssey problem, devouring every scrap of public information, her mind alight with possibilities. She had arrived dressed in the most professional clothes. She owned a simple black blouse and slacks, which still felt woefully inadequate compared to the designer labels that surrounded her. "I'm here to see Alexander Sterling," she told the receptionist, her voice barely a whisper. "My name is Amelia Rose." The receptionist, a man with impossibly perfect hair, typed her name into his computer. His eyebrows shot up in surprise. "Of course, Ms. Rose. Mr. Sterling is expecting you. Please go right up. 50th floor." He gestured towards a restricted access elevator, which chimed and opened for her, as if by magic. The ride up was a silent, stomach-churning ascent. When the doors opened, Alexander Sterling was waiting for her. He looked different here in his element. The weary desperation of last night was gone, replaced by an aura of command. "Amelia." "Glad you made it," he said with a curt nod. "Let's not waste time." He led her through a maze of glass-walled offices and open-plan workspaces. Heads turned as they walked. People stared, their curiosity piqued by the unfamiliar woman being personally escorted by the CEO. Amelia felt 100 pairs of eyes on her, judging her clothes, her backpack, her very presence. She had never felt more like an imposter. They entered a large conference room, already occupied by about a dozen engineers. The air was thick with tension and the smell of stale coffee. This was the Odyssey team. They all looked exhausted, but their expressions sharpened as Alexander walked in with Amelia. "Everyone, this is Amelia Rose." Alexander announced his voice, leaving no room for argument. "She's a consultant who is going to be providing a fresh perspective on our current problem. Give her full access to the Odyssey source code. The server logs everything. She will report directly to me. I expect your full cooperation." A heavy silence followed. The engineers exchanged uneasy glances. Amelia's eyes fell on one man in particular. He was in his late 30s with a sharp suit and a condescending smirk that seemed permanently affixed to his face. A nameplate on the table identified him as Benjamin Carter, lead software architect. Benjamin leaned back in his chair, tapping a pen on the table. "A consultant," he said, his tone dripping with skepticism. He looked Amelia up and down, his gaze lingering for a moment on her simple clothes. "May I ask which firm you're with, Ms. Rose? Or perhaps which university's doctoral program we've poached you from?" The question was a clear challenge designed to humiliate her and undermine her authority before she'd even begun. The other engineers watched, waiting to see how she would respond. Before Amelia could speak, Alexander cut in, his voice like ice. "Her credentials are that she has my confidence, Ben. That's all you need to know. Get her set up." The rebuke silenced Benjamin, but his eyes burned with resentment. He gestured curtly to a junior engineer. "Kevin, get Ms. Rose a guest terminal and access credentials." Kevin, a nervous young man who looked like he hadn't slept in a week, led Amelia to a small empty desk in the corner of the main development floor. It was clearly a temporary spot, an afterthought. As he typed furiously, setting up her access, he spoke in a hushed tone. "Don't mind Ben," he whispered. "He's just on edge. We all are. He's been leading this project for 2 years. He sees it as his baby." "And it's a sick baby," Amelia replied quietly, her eyes already scanning the architecture diagrams pinned to a nearby wall. Once she had access, the world outside fell away. The whispers and stares of the other engineers, the intimidating corporate environment, even the looming presence of Benjamin Carter. It all faded into the background. Before her, on a high-resolution monitor, was the Odyssey source code. Millions of lines of it. A sprawling, complex digital city. She spent the first few hours just reading. She didn't try to change anything. She just absorbed the structure, the flow of data, the logic that governed this artificial universe. She navigated through modules named Predictive Path, Quantum Root, and Nexus AI Core. It was brilliant, ambitious, and deeply flawed. The code was like a beautiful, intricate tapestry with a single thread pulled, causing the entire image to warp in a way that was almost invisible up close. The team had focused on the AI core, convinced the leak was born from the complex machine learning algorithms, but Amelia, guided by her instinct from the night before, gravitated towards the foundational layers, the code that managed memory and process allocation. It was less glamorous, the plumbing of the system, and she suspected it had been given less scrutiny. By midday, she started to notice a pattern. Tiny, almost insignificant discrepancies in the timestamps between a resource request and its allocation log. Milliseconds of lag that shouldn't exist. She tried to access the deeper server logs, the ones that would show the hardware-level interactions, but her access was denied. She found Kevin. "I need kernel-level log access for the primary simulation servers," she said. Kevin paled. I can't grant that. Only Ben can authorize that level of access. It's a security protocol." Amelia walked over to Benjamin's desk. He was on the phone, speaking in loud, important tones. He saw her approach and deliberately turned his back to her, laughing at something the person on the other end of the line said. She waited. When he finally hung up, he swiveled in his chair with an exaggerated sigh. "Yes, I need kernel log access," she stated calmly. He scoffed. "Absolutely not. We don't give consultants root access to our most secure servers. Do you have any idea the proprietary data you could compromise? I'm trying to trace a memory allocation issue. The standard application logs aren't granular enough. The discrepancy I'm seeing is happening at a level below what they capture," she explained, keeping her voice even. "A discrepancy," he sneered. "Listen, Ms. Rose, I have a team of the world's best engineers who have built this system from the ground up. We've run every diagnostic imaginable. I assure you, if there was a discrepancy to be found, we would have found it. Why don't you go back to your desk and consult? It was a dead end." He was stonewalling her, protecting his territory. He couldn't stand the idea that an outsider, a woman with no official credentials, might find something he and his vaunted team had missed. It was a matter of ego. Frustrated, Amelia returned to her terminal. She couldn't go deeper, so she would have to go wider. If she couldn't see the root of the problem, she would have to map its effects. She began writing a custom diagnostic script. It wasn't a fix, but a tracer, a program designed to run alongside Odyssey, monitoring every single thread it spawned, tracking its memory footprint, and logging its behavior in a way the existing tools didn't. She worked through the evening, long after most of the team had gone home defeated. Benjamin Carter left with a smug look in her direction, as if her continued presence was proof of her failure. Only Alexander Sterling remained working silently in his glass-walled office, watching her. As the city lights began to sparkle outside, Amelia felt a grim determination settle over her. Benjamin Carter saw her as a threat to his authority. The team saw her as a bizarre curiosity, but she knew she was close. The ghost in the machine had left a trail, faint as it was, and she was the only one willing to crawl into the dark, forgotten corners of the system to find it. The lion's den was cold and unwelcoming, but she wasn't there to make friends. She was there to hunt. The next 48 hours blurred into a sleepless, caffeine-fueled marathon. Amelia lived in front of her terminal, the glow of the screen her only sun and moon. The temporary desk became her world, littered with empty coffee cups, scribbled diagrams on napkins, and the occasional sandwich brought by a sympathetic-looking Kevin. Alexander Sterling kept his distance, but she felt his presence a silent observer in his office, his own lights burning late into the night. He was giving her space, a commodity she desperately needed. The diagnostic script she wrote, which she privately named Cerberus, was her hound. She let it run in the simulation environment, and it began to paint a picture. The memory leak wasn't consistent. It didn't grow linearly. It happened in violent, sporadic bursts, always coinciding with a specific set of circumstances when the Odyssey platform was simulating high-volume, short-distance shipping routes, like citywide drone deliveries. This was a critical clue. The team had been focused on massive international cargo simulations, assuming bigger loads meant a bigger strain. They were looking in the wrong place. The problem was in the churn. The system was designed to create, track, and destroy thousands of tiny delivery routes per minute. Each route was a thread, a short-lived process. The theory she'd mentioned to Alexander in the kitchen about orphaned threads gnawed at her. Benjamin Carter's refusal to grant her kernel-level access was a roadblock. but it forced her to be more creative. Late on the second night, with the 72-hour deadline looming like a guillotine, she found it. It wasn't in the AI core's complex predictive models. It wasn't a catastrophic, obvious flaw. It was a single elegant and devastatingly simple bug in a low-level library, a piece of foundational code written years ago and assumed to be perfect. The library handled thread management. When a new delivery route was created, the library would instantiate a handler thread. A separate, seemingly unrelated cleanup process was supposed to run periodically, checking for completed threads and releasing their allocated memory. The problem lay in the interaction between the two. The cleanup process had a timeout. If it couldn't get a lock on a handler thread within a few milliseconds, because the thread was still initializing or momentarily busy, it would skip it and move on. In long, slow simulations, this was never an issue. But in the high-churn scenario of thousands of rapid, short-lived threads, a statistical certainty emerged. A small percentage of new threads were being created and destroyed so quickly that the cleanup process would always miss them. The thread would complete its task and die, but because the cleanup process had skipped it, its memory allocation was never officially released. It became an orphan, a ghost. It wasn't a leak. It was an accumulation of ghosts, thousands of tiny forgotten memory blocks accumulating over hours until the system choked and crashed. A wave of dizzying euphoria washed over Amelia. She leaned back in her chair, her body aching from exhaustion, but her mind electric. She had found it. She had found the ghost in the machine. The fix was just as simple. A small change to the cleanup process. Instead of skipping a busy thread, it should queue it for the next pass. A 3-line change to solve a billion-dollar problem. Her first instinct was to run to Alexander's office, but she stopped herself. She needed proof, irrefutable proof. She modified her Cerberus script to log every time the cleanup process skipped a thread. Then she ran the high-churn simulation. The log file exploded. It was the smoking gun. She saved her proposed code change, the log file, and a concise, step-by-step explanation of the problem and her solution into a secure folder on the local server. She named the folder Odyssey Solution AR. Her initials. A small act of ownership. It was 3:30 a.m. She decided to get 2 hours of sleep in a small, unused wellness room before presenting everything to Alexander at first light. It was done. But she hadn't been working entirely alone. Benjamin Carter had been watching her, consumed by a mixture of professional pride and raw fear. He couldn't accept that this Waitress could succeed where he had failed. He had seen the lights on, seen her fanatical focus. That afternoon, feigning a need to help Kevin with a server issue near her desk, he had managed to install a keystroke logger and screen-sharing spy tool on her terminal. It was a gross violation of privacy and corporate policy, but he justified it as monitoring a security risk. From his home office, he had watched her every move. He saw her isolate the high-churn scenario. He saw her focus on the thread management library. And then he saw her find the bug. He watched his blood running cold as she typed out the simple, elegant solution. He saw her run the final diagnostic, saw the damning log file, and watched as she saved everything to the folder marked Odyssey Solution AR. Panic gave way to a dark, cold ambition. She had found it, but she hadn't reported it yet. She was an outsider, a nobody with no proof she'd been the first one there. He, on the other hand, was the lead architect. It was his project, his team. Who would they believe? Working with a feverish intensity, he replicated her work. It was easy now that he knew where to look. He copied her 3-line code change, making a tiny cosmetic alteration, changing a variable name so it wasn't an exact duplicate. He wrote his own explanation, plagiarizing her logic and passing it off as the result of his team's tireless round-the-clock effort. He created a new folder, saved his own version of the fix, and then, with a final malicious act, he used his administrative privileges to access the server. He found her folder, Odyssey Solution AR, and deleted it. He then wiped the access logs for that specific directory covering his tracks. Her proof was gone. At 7:00 a.m., just as Amelia was waking up stiff and sore on a wellness room sofa, Benjamin Carter sent a company-wide email to Alexander Sterling and the entire executive board. Subject urgent. Breakthrough Odyssey platform. Stability issue solved. The email began, "After a final intensive deep dive session led by myself, my team has successfully identified and resolved the critical memory allocation flaw in the Odyssey platform. The solution is prepared for immediate implementation. A full technical debrief will be ready for your 9 a.m. meeting." He had won. He had stolen her breakthrough, her moment of triumph, and claimed it as his own. The stage was set for his victory, and Amelia Rose was about to walk onto it, completely unaware that her ghost had been exorcised, and a far more tangible demon had taken its place. Amelia walked into the 9 a.m. board meeting feeling a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. She clutched her tablet, ready to present her findings, the elegant simplicity of her solution, a source of quiet pride. She had slept for only a few hours, but the adrenaline of discovery was a potent stimulant. She entered the 50th floor boardroom to a scene of celebration. Benjamin Carter was at the head of the table, basking in the glow of praise. The other engineers, relieved and jubilant, were clapping him on the back. Alexander Sterling stood by the window, a look of profound relief on his face. He caught Amelia's eye and gave her a nod of acknowledgement, which she misinterpreted as anticipation for her presentation. A truly remarkable piece of detective work. Ben, one of the board members, a portly man named Robert Morrison, was saying. "You've saved the company." Benjamin smiled, a magnanimous false expression. It was a team effort. We never lost faith in our process. We simply had to drill down past the application layer and re-examine the foundational thread handling protocols. A subtle race condition, but we caught it. Amelia froze her tablet, suddenly feeling like a lead weight. Thread handling protocols, race condition. He was using her words, her discovery. A cold dread washed over her, so intense it made her feel nauseous. Alexander turned his attention to the room. "Ben, walk us through it." With a smug confidence, Benjamin projected the code onto the main screen. He presented the 3-line fix, his cosmetically altered version, and explained the logic behind it with the clarity of a man who had understood it for a full 4 hours. He explained how the cleanup process missed the rapidly cycling threads, creating orphaned memory blocks. He presented it as the triumphant culmination of his team's tireless work. Amelia stood in stunned silence, invisible. It was her work, her breakthrough. He had stolen it, every last piece of it. She looked at the faces of the other engineers. They believed him. Why wouldn't they? He was their leader. She was the strange woman who sat in the corner for 2 days. "Excellent work," Alexander said, and the words were a punch to Amelia's gut. He turned to her. "Amelia, thank you for your time. Your input in directing the team's focus was clearly valuable. Please see my assistant about your consulting fee. We'll be sure it's a generous one." Dismissal. He was dismissing her. He thought she had merely helped, while Ben had delivered the solution. The injustice was so sharp, so bitter, it stole her breath. She started, her voice trembling. "That's my solution." Benjamin let out a short, pitying laugh. "Ms. Rose, I understand the desire to be part of a victory this significant, but let's not get carried away. My team and I worked on this. The commit logs will show that." He was right. He had covered his tracks. Her folder was gone, her proof. I found it last night. Around 3 a.m., she insisted, her voice gaining a desperate edge. I wrote a diagnostic script, Cerberus, to trace the thread skips. A script, Benjamin said, his voice dripping with condescension. We have dozens of professional diagnostic suites. We don't rely on amateur scripts. Mr. Sterling, I think the stress of the situation is perhaps causing some confusion. All eyes were on Amelia. She looked like a fraud, a desperate wannabe trying to steal credit from the hero of the hour. She looked at Alexander, pleading with her eyes. She saw relief warring with a flicker of something else in his expression, a nascent seed of doubt. He remembered their conversation in the kitchen. He remembered her immediate theory about orphaned threads. Ben's explanation was too neat, too sudden. "Let's just focus on the solution," Alexander said, his voice neutral, trying to diffuse the tension. "The important thing is that it's fixed. We can deploy the patch and notify Viridian Global." The meeting concluded. Benjamin was a hero. Amelia was a ghost, haunting the edges of a celebration that should have been hers. Defeated, she turned and left the boardroom, the sound of their cheerful planning fading behind her. She had failed, not in finding the bug, but in navigating the treacherous world of human ambition and deceit. But Alexander Sterling hadn't built $1 billion empire on blind faith. He was a systems analyst at heart, and that applied to people as much as to code. Amelia's desperate plea, her specific mention of a script named Cerberus, and the timing, it all felt wrong. Ben's sudden breakthrough, after weeks of failure, hours after Amelia had been given access, was too convenient. He remembered the look in Amelia's eyes in the kitchen, the raw, unpolished brilliance. He contrasted it with Ben's polished political maneuvering. While the rest of the company celebrated, Alexander returned to his office and closed the door. He didn't call his security chief. He didn't want a corporate investigation that could be managed and sanitized by others. This he would do himself. He opened a secure terminal one with the highest level of system privileges. He wasn't just a CEO, he was still a coder at his core. He knew his way around the guts of the network. First, he searched the entire server for any file named Cerberus. Nothing. It must have been on her local terminal. Next, he looked for the folder she'd mentioned, Odyssey Solution AR. It didn't exist. As Benjamin had boasted, it was gone. But Alexander knew that deleting a file on a high-security server doesn't always mean it's truly gone. It's marked for being overwritten. He initiated a low-level sector scan of the server's drives, a process that would take time. While it ran, he examined the server access logs. As Benjamin had predicted, the logs showed Benjamin Carter accessing the core library and committing the final code change around 7 a.m. Clean. Too clean. A man covering his tracks often sweeps too thoroughly. Alexander widened his search, looking not just at file access, but at all administrative command logs for the entire server partition over the last 12 hours. And then he found it. At 3:47 a.m., Benjamin Carter's administrative account had initiated a RF command, a forceful, irreversible delete on a directory named Odyssey Solution AR. Immediately following that, at 3:48 a.m., the same account had run a command to manually clear the access log records for that specific directory for the preceding 5 minutes. It was the digital equivalent of a murderer wiping fingerprints from a crime scene. Benjamin hadn't just deleted her work, he had tried to erase the very fact that he had deleted it. But he made a mistake. He'd cleared the file access log, but he hadn't cleared the higher-level command log which recorded the clearing itself. It was an act of supreme arrogance. He never imagined anyone, least of all the CEO, would dig this deep. A cold, hard anger settled in Alexander's chest. The sector scan finished. The deleted folder was partially recoverable. He restored it. Inside were Amelia's original files, her beautifully commented code, her detailed explanation, and the Cerberus log file, its timestamp reading 3:32 a.m. The evidence was irrefutable. It was a complete documented timeline of discovery and theft. He looked at the recovered files, then at the record of Benjamin's deceit. The betrayal wasn't just against Amelia. It was a betrayal of the company, of the very principle of innovation and integrity he had built Nexus Dynamics upon. He picked up his phone. He didn't call security. He didn't call HR. He called the head of the board, Robert Morrison. "Robert," he said, his voice dangerously calm. "Get everyone back in the boardroom. Now." The celebration is over. The mood in the boardroom was one of confused but pleasant anticipation. The board members and senior engineers filed back in their faces, flushed with the relief of a crisis averted. They took their seats, the air buzzing with low chatter about calling their families, about the soaring stock price that would surely follow the announcement. Benjamin Carter was the center of this jubilant universe. He strode in with a confident swagger, accepting handshakes and pats on the back. He took his seat at the head of the long, polished table, not as a lead architect, but as a conquering general ready to receive his laurels. He was already composing the email he would send to his headhunter, leveraging this victory into an even more prestigious, higher-paying role at a competitor. Amelia was not among them. Alexander had sent a quiet, discreet message via his personal assistant for her to wait in the tranquil solitude of his private office. He needed her away from this, away from the explosion he was about to detonate. When the heavy glass door hissed shut, sealing the room, Alexander remained standing. He didn't take his seat. He stood beside the massive dark monolith of the main display, his posture rigid, his face a mask of cold gravity. The cheerful murmurs died instantly, replaced by a wary, uncertain silence. Every eye in the room turned to him. "Our celebration," Alexander began, his voice quiet, but carrying an immense weight that commanded the room's full attention, was premature. "We have indeed found the solution to the Odyssey problem. However, the wrong person has been given the credit for it, and the real story reveals a rot within this company that is far more dangerous than any memory leak." A tense electric stillness fell over the room. Benjamin Carter's self-satisfied smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of confusion and alarm. He shifted in his seat, his bravado evaporating like mist. Ben Alexander said, his eyes locking onto his lead architect with an unnerving intensity. "You told us you and your team identified the thread handling issue after an intensive all-night deep dive. Is that correct?" "Yes, that's correct," Benjamin affirmed, his voice a fraction less steady than before. "It was a complex issue, a subtle race condition. We worked tirelessly, following a lead." "A lead," Alexander interrupted, taking a slow step forward. His voice was laced with a chilling sarcasm. "That's fascinating, because the solution was actually found documented and finalized at 3:32 a.m. Not by your team, not by you. It was found by Amelia Rose. With a deliberate press of a button on his console, the main screen behind him blazed to life. It was not Benjamin's code. It was a perfect high-resolution image of the recovered folder, Odyssey Solution AR. Inside, displayed for all to see, were Amelia's pristine files. Her elegantly commented code, her concise and brilliant explanation of the problem, and the Cerberus log file, its timestamp a glaring indictment, 32:17 a.m. Gasps and sharp intakes of breath rippled through the room. The faces of the engineers moments ago, filled with relief, were now painted with shock and disbelief. Benjamin Carter's face went corpse white, the blood draining from it, as if a plug had been pulled. This is absurd." "A fabrication," he stammered, his voice cracking, rising in panic. "She's an opportunist. She must have seen our work somehow, and is trying to frame me, to steal my team's victory. Is she?" Alexander countered his voice, dropping to a dangerous whisper. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. The quiet fury was more terrifying than any shout. He brought up a new window on the screen, positioning it right next to Amelia's folder. It was a raw text file, the server's high-level command log. He highlighted 2 lines in damning red. "Then perhaps you can explain this log entry to the board, Ben. It shows that at 3:47 a.m., your administrative account, and only your account, has these privileges, executed a command, RF. For our non-technical board members, Alexander said, his gaze sweeping across the stunned faces, that is the digital equivalent of dousing a document in gasoline and setting it on fire. It is a command for forceful permanent deletion. And the target of that command was a directory named Dark Temp Odyssey Solution, OAR. He let the implication hang in the dead air for a moment, before delivering the final crushing blow. And then there's this entry just 1 minute later. A command again from your account to manually clear the access log records for that specific directory. You were sloppy, Ben. In your arrogant haste, you wiped your fingerprints from the safe, but you left behind a crystal-clear security video of yourself holding the rag. You never thought anyone would look this deep. The room was utterly, profoundly silent. The evidence was absolute, a digital death sentence. Benjamin stared at the screen, his mouth slightly agape, his mind refusing to process his complete and total ruin. The intricate web of lies he had spun in a matter of hours had been unraveled with cold technological precision. He looked around at his team, at the board members, at the junior engineers, and saw no support, no sympathy. He saw only disgust, disappointment, and the cold, hard stare of judgment. "The greatest threat to this company isn't a bug," Alexander said, his voice resonating with the conviction of a founder defending the soul of his creation. "It's a flaw in our character, an insidious culture of ego, of credentialism, of arrogance that would lead a senior manager to steal the work of a junior contributor rather than admit that brilliance can come from anywhere. A culture that would dismiss genius simply because it doesn't have the right title on a business card." He looked directly at Benjamin, his eyes devoid of any pity. "You are fired. Effective immediately. Your network access, your keycard, your very presence in this company has been terminated. Security is waiting for you outside this door. You may collect your personal belongings from your desk, and nothing else." He then turned his steely gaze upon the senior members of Benjamin's team, the ones who had smirked at Amelia, who had fostered the environment of exclusion. "And for the rest of you, let this be a lesson. You stood by. You were complicit in your silence. The architecture of this team, and perhaps this entire division, is about to be fundamentally changed. Nexus Dynamics will be a place where talent is the only currency that matters. It will be a true meritocracy, or it will be nothing." Benjamin Carter, utterly broken, pushed his chair back. It scraped loudly in the silent room. He stood, his shoulders slumped in defeat. He didn't say a word, didn't look at anyone. As he walked toward the door, a man stripped of his pride and his career, he stumbled slightly, bumping into a chair, a final clumsy misstep from a man who had orchestrated such a precise, malicious theft. Then he was gone. Later, Alexander found Amelia in his office. She was standing by the vast window, looking out at the sprawling city, now bathed in the warm, clear light of the afternoon sun. She looked small against the backdrop of the skyline she had just helped save. "It's done," he said softly, entering the room. She turned her eyes, showing the exhaustion and stress of the last 48 hours, but they were clear. "He deleted everything. I thought He tried, Alexander corrected her gently. But you of all people should know. Good code, like the truth, always leaves a trace. I found it. He walked over to stand beside her, not as a CEO to a consultant, but as one builder to another. I am sorry, Amelia, for what he did, and for my own part in this. I almost believed him. I was so desperate for a solution that I nearly accepted the easiest answer, not the right one. That's a failure of leadership. My failure. I should have known he would try something she whispered. I should have been more careful. No, Alexander said, his voice firm, insistent. You should be able to do brilliant, world-changing work without having to constantly watch your back for jackals. It is my job to build a place where you can. A job I intend to do much better. He paused, letting the weight of the moment settle before he unveiled his true purpose. The Gilded Spoon has an unexpected vacancy on their waitstaff effective immediately. Coincidentally, Nexus Dynamics has a vacancy for a senior software architect. More than that, I am creating a new division, effective today, the Systemic Integrity Group. It will report directly to me, and its mandate will be to act as our company's conscience, to challenge every assumption, to stress test our code, our security, and our processes. To find the flaws before the rest of the world does. It needs a leader with a unique perspective, someone who can see the whole system, not just the individual lines of code. The position is yours, Amelia. If you want it. Amelia stared at him, her mind reeling. Senior architect, head of a division. It was a leap so vast she hadn't even allowed it to form in her wildest dreams. I don't have a degree, she whispered, the old insecurity, the ghost of her past, making one last stand. Alexander smiled a genuine warm smile. You have something far more valuable. You have the solution. You saw the whole system when an army of experts was lost in the weeds. That's not something they can teach you at Caltech or anywhere else. So Amelia rose, he said, extending a hand to her. What do you say? Will you help me build the future of this company? A slow smile spread across Amelia's face, a brilliant, radiant smile that reached her eyes and erased every last trace of fear. The waitress was gone. The imposter was gone. In her place stood an architect. Yes, she said, her voice firm and clear as she shook his hand. Yes, I will. That's the incredible story of Amelia Rose and Alexander Sterling, a testament to the fact that brilliance isn't confined to boardrooms and elite universities. It proves that true talent can be found in the most unexpected places, and that integrity is the most valuable asset any person or company can have. Amelia, the waitress with a hidden gift, didn't just fix a bug in a piece of software. She exposed a flaw in a corporate culture, and in doing so, rebuilt it from the ground up, stronger and more honest than before. Her journey is a powerful reminder to never judge a book by its cover, and to always look for the hidden genius that exists all around us. If this story inspired you, please give this video a thumbs up and share it with someone who needs to hear that their circumstances don't define their potential. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next story about the hidden heroes who change the world.